Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're kind of venturing into some, well, unsettling territory.
Oh,
Yeah, this idea that our morals, what we think is right and wrong,
yeah.
maybe it's not just guiding us.
Go on. What else would it be doing?
Well, could it be a form of control? A really subtle one, maybe. That actually shapes what we desire, particularly, sexually.
Ah, okay. That is a provocative thought. It really makes you question things, don't
It
they?
does.
Are our desires actually ours? Or are they somehow manufactured by the society we absorb?
Exactly. We like to think they're just natural, primal urges, sort of.
But maybe they're not quite so raw. Maybe society, with its rules, its expectations, it's subtly sculpting them.
Like morality is some kind of hidden architect, building the blueprint for our own longings.
You could look at it that way. I mean, think way back some of the earliest laws, like the Code of Hammurabi.
Right, ancient stuff.
Those weren't just about keeping the peace. They had very specific rules about sex, marriage, adultery.
So trying to control that energy,
Yeah,
even then.
absolutely. Defining it, directing it, channeling it within certain boundaries. It wasn't just, don't do this. It was shaping what you should want.
And that pattern just continues. Because I think about, say, the Victorian era.
Oh, definitely. Extreme prudery, very rigid roles.
Or even now, social media, right, with community standards constantly shifting about what's okay to show or say about desire.
It's a persistent theme, isn't it? This societal need to manage, to direct our impulses.
But the really fascinating part, maybe the unsettling part, is how we take it all in.
Yes, it's not just fear of getting caught or being shamed publicly.
No, it gets deeper than that.
We internalize these codes.
Yeah.
They become part of our own psychological makeup. Freud's idea of the superego is, well, crucial here.
The superego, that inner voice.
Exactly. The internalized parent, the voice of society, constantly judging our thoughts, our fantasies, especially the sexual ones, measuring them against the rules.
Oh, yeah, that little voice whispering, you shouldn't think that, or that's just wrong. I think everyone recognizes that feeling, right? That flicker of shame or guilt. Maybe over just a fleeting thought and attraction you feel you shouldn't have.
Yes. And it's not someone else telling you off. It's you policing your own inner world.
And this isn't just personal, is it? Cultures do this on a bigger scale.
Absolutely. Different societies have different rules, different gender roles, different taboos around sex. They all actively shape what Freud called eros, that basic life force, the drive for connection, for pleasure.
So it's like a cultural choreography of desire. Some moves are okay, others are forbidden.
That's a good way to put it. And there's always a trade-off, isn't there?
What do you mean?
Well, for civilization to work, to have order, it seems we need to domesticate our instincts somewhat.
Right, Freud talked about that, the discontent of civilization.
Exactly, that constant tension between our raw urges and the need for social harmony.
So how does civilization manage that? How does it channel things?
Through mechanisms like repression, pushing the unacceptable stuff down out of conscious awareness, and sublimation, redirecting that raw energy into something else, something socially acceptable or even valued.
Like art or intense work.
Precisely. Repressed sexual energy might fuel creativity.
Yeah.
Aggressive urges might be channeled into, say, competitive sports. It's a constant redirection.
But desire, it pushes back, doesn't it? It doesn't always stay channeled.
It certainly resists. Look at something like cancel culture today.
Okay. How does that fit?
Well, on one level, it's about accountability, sure.
Huh.
But you could also see it as a kind of modern moral panic, especially around sex and power.
Revealing those underlying tensions between what individuals want and what the group demands.
Exactly. It raises the question, is our current focus on sexual morality, often framed as liberation, is it really freedom?
Or just a new set of controls, different language, different standards, but still control.
It's a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
Are we genuinely freer, or just adhering to a different, perhaps more complex set of expectations?
That paradox feels very real. We're told, be authentic, own your desires. But then there's this constant stream of messages about which thoughts, feelings, actions around sex are okay and which aren't. Like, freedom is fine as long as your authentic self fits the current mold.
And Freud was very clear that this demand for sacrifice, this taming of instinct,
Yeah.
it comes with risks.
What kind of risks?
Too much repression, bottling it all up too tightly, that can lead to psychological distress, neurosis, anxiety, sometimes outright rebellion.
So the very things meant to hold society together can actually cause problems.
They can become sources of friction, of fragmentation. It really highlights that we're all caught in this this negotiation, this dance between our own desires and the rules of the group. Nobody's outside of it.
Let's shift focus slightly then. You mentioned Freud. Talk more about those core drives he discussed, eros and thanatos.
Right, the life drive and the death drive. Eros is about connection, creation, pleasure, love, pulling things together. Thanatos is, well, the opposite. Aggression, destruction, pulling things apart.
Primal forces.
Very primal. And civilization's job, in a way, is to manage both. It needs eros for creativity, for building society, for love. It needs to channel thanatos, maybe into competition or defense,
Right.
rather than letting it run wild.
So it needs these drives, but it's also scared of them in their raw form.
Exactly. That's the contradiction. They fuel progress, art, everything vibrant. But untamed, they threaten the whole structure.
So that's where repression and sublimation come back in.
Yes, they're the tools civilization uses. Morality provides the blueprint, the rules for how to transform these instincts into something acceptable, even useful.
Can you give an example? Like, how does this play out?
Well, think about marriage as an institution.
Okay. Celebration of eros, right? Love, connection.
On the surface, yes.
Uh.
But historically, and often still, it's also fundamentally about regulating sexual energy. Creating stable units for raising children, for economic alliances, for passing on property.
The vows themselves, they're contracts of restraint, in a way.
They often are. They implicitly or explicitly require suppressing desires outside the marriage bond for the sake of that social stability.
And even if society seems more liberated now, that inner judge, the superego, it doesn't just disappear.
Not at all. That feeling of sexual guilt can be incredibly persistent, even when the external rules seem looser. It's deeply ingrained for many people.
So sublimation is the escape valve, channeling that pent-up energy elsewhere.
It's one pathway. Frustrated desire becoming art. Aggression becoming ambition in business or sports. Deep longing poured into writing.
But it's not like the original drive just vanishes.
No, sublimation is imperfect. The instinct is still there, just rerouted, latent, you might say.
That makes me think again about the Victorians, all that repression, but also this incredible explosion of culture, science, industry. Was that sublimated eros fueling it all?
It's a compelling interpretation, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the very constraints generate a different kind of energy.
But what happens when repression fails? When sublimation isn't enough?
Then potentially, thanatos asserts itself more directly. Aggression, violence, the destructive impulse breaking through. It highlights how fragile that balance really is within civilization.
And in modern society, where do we see these tensions playing out?
Well, you could look at something like the huge market for online pornography.
As a safety valve?
Possibly. A space where forbidden themes, repressed desires can be explored virtually, maybe without disrupting the real-world social order quite so much.
What about political scandals? You often see figures who preach strict morality getting caught.
Right, and that's often dismissed as simple hypocrisy, which it might be, partly.
But maybe it's more.
Maybe it's also a symptom of that fundamental conflict, the clash between the idealized standards of the superego and the messy reality of human drives. It's that internal struggle bursting into view.
It feels like we make this deal then to belong, like a Faustian bargain almost.
In a sense, we trade parts of ourselves, suppress desires, prune away aspects of our nature, all for acceptance, for being part of the group.
And those denied parts, they don't just go away.
No, Jung called it the shadow self. It's the repository for everything we deny or dislike about ourselves. And it can erupt, can't it? Especially during times of crisis, personal or collective.
And culture itself, it acts like a collective superego, dictating what's acceptable.
Yes. And when those collective standards shift, you often get widespread anxiety, moral panics.
Like the Red Scare or the Satanic Panic years ago, or even, as you said, aspects of cancel culture now.
They can all be seen as moments where society's grappling, often fearfully, with changing moral boundaries, with perceived threats to the established order of desire and behavior.
So this whole relationship between morality and sexuality, it's just this constant messy tension, freedom versus belonging, individual versus group.
And the solutions are always imperfect, always evolving. There are no easy answers here.
Which brings us to something even more unsettling.
Go on.
Could the very freedom we think we're chasing, could it actually be another form of repression, just disguised?
That's a deeply disquieting idea, but yes, I think we have to consider it. Look at the cycles.
Sexual revolution, liberation.
Followed, almost inevitably, by new forms of moral judgment, new anxieties, new kinds of policing, often using the language of freedom or safety, ironically.
So civilization doesn't get rid of repression, it just rebrands it, updates the operating system.
It reconfigures it, adapts it. Cancel culture, for example, with its focus on language, on problematic behavior, on things like toxic masculinity, you could argue it's a very contemporary superego demanding conformity. New terms, perhaps, but a similar function.
Wow, so maybe the core problem isn't morality itself.
But perhaps our unwillingness to really face our own shadows, the uncomfortable, less acceptable parts of ourselves, individually and collectively.
The self-deception involved in navigating that tightrope walk between desire and belonging.
Exactly. How much do we fool ourselves about our own motives, our own compromises?
And realizing how much we participate in the system, even when we think we're fighting it.
Through our own judgments of others, our own suppressed desires, our striving to fit in, even to fit into the rebel mold sometimes, we are part of the machinery.
It seems like a kind of karmic wheel. Repression, rebellion, new repression. Each generation thinks it's breaking free, but maybe just imposes different chains.
There's certainly a cyclical feel to it. Victorian rigidity gives way to the sexual revolution, which then leads to new debates and anxieties about consent, harassment, and acceptable expression.
Did Freud see any way out, or are we just doomed to this discontent?
He saw the discontent as largely inevitable, yes, a price of civilization. But he did believe in the management of repression, primarily through sublimation.
Channeling it consciously.
Consciously, yes. But that requires real self-awareness, awareness of the desires you're suppressing, the guilt they generate. Otherwise, sublimation can just become another layer of denial, another form of repression itself.
So we circle back to that core tension, eros and thanatos. Freedom and belonging, it seems inescapable.
It seems to be a fundamental condition of being human in society.
Which leaves us with some really difficult, maybe unanswerable questions.
Such as,
how do we actually honor our desires without causing harm? How do we balance that individual freedom with collective responsibility, genuinely? And how do we live, knowing that the civilization we depend on is built on this foundation of suppressed instincts? It's profoundly uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable, and perhaps there aren't neat answers. Perhaps embracing that discomfort, that complexity, is part of what it means.
That's definitely something to chew on.
Yeah.
So for you listening, as you think about all this, where do you see yourself in this dynamic between your own desires and the pressures of collective morality? Are you the rebel, the enforcer? A bit of both. Something else. Because as we've kind of explored, nobody's really outside the system.
All participants.
We're all in that negotiation one way or another. And maybe just continuing to wrestle with these tensions, these questions. Maybe that's simply what it is to be fully alive, fully human, fully complex.
The rest is silence.